every morning with drive. Being on the grind, know I had to survive. We had to win. Started from the dirt and the rubble. I had to be the needle that was popping your bubble.
Hello and welcome into the Rookie Prospect Profile Series. This is a Zilla Fantasy Elite production. Thanks for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. Enjoy bringing out these machine learning model videos for you, and hopefully you do too. So hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be looking at running back Frank Gore Jr. in both the RStudio model and the neural network model for running backs. Frank Gore Jr. was not drafted in the 2024 NFL draft, but they did get picked up by the Buffalo Bills. They played college football for the Southern Miss Golden Eagles. He comes into the league, at least in the combine, at 5'8", 201 pounds. Wikipedia page says 195, but at the combine he was 201 pounds. Physical traits there, 30.6 BMI. He actually ran a 4.74 40-yard dash, which was really bad. Gave him the worst speed score out of the entire class at 79.6. That may very well be the worst speed score in the entire database for all of these players. So keep that in mind. Using some of these physical traits along with their college numbers, putting those into the RStudio model for Frank Gore Jr., we get a prospect score of 10.397. Considering as an undrafted free agent, he's small, he's slow, still gets a pretty decent prospect score here at 10.397. Certainly could have been a lot worse than that, but his college dominator rating really boosting that up at 45.8%. So that 10.397 is ranked 271 overall out of the 327 running backs in the RStudio models database. That is in the 17th percentile at 17.1%. Shifting over to see who the closest comparables are for Frank Gore Jr., we see the closest score there is Brandon Oliver. Then the next five better than him are Darrell Williams, Tyson Williams, Lance Dunbar, Tracandrick West, and Boston Scott. Boston Scott may be a pretty good comp here for Frank Gore Jr. The next five worst: Spencer Ware, George Wynn, Keaton Mitchell, Jarrett Patterson, and Jordan Mason. All right, so that's the RStudio model. Now we're going to get into the machine learning model to see how Frank Gore did in that. And holy cow, I might have some explaining to do on this one. As you see, he was number one across the board. Best minimum, best 10th percentile, best 25th, best mean, best median, best 75th percentile, best 90th, and best rank, maximum rank in the class out of 31 running backs. He was number one across the board. Getting into some of those values, minimum output at 8.83, barely crested Trey Benson at 8.77, just for reference. His mean and median at 13.6 and 13.36 are the best in the class, but that's just above Braylon Allen. He was hovering at 13.3. He was the second best in the class, so keep that in mind. He's certainly number one, but he's not far and above, everybody else. Then that maximum output at 18.91, definitely the best in the class. I believe next closest somewhere in the 7th. We had actually Isaac Garendo at 18.17, so pretty well ahead of the next closest guy there. So keep that in mind. Actually, just to explain this, we'll get into the historical comps here. So just to explain the Frank Gore Jr., why would he be coming in at number one across the board in this? Like, dude, you need a different model. This clearly doesn't work if you're getting Frank Gore Jr. as a number one running back in the class. This running back class was pretty weak. The 18.91 is a pretty solid maximum score, but I don't think that would have even been in the top three last year. Maybe not even the top five. We had some pretty good maximum outputs. Devon Achane was at like 23. I believe Gibbs and Bijan were both above 20. Frank Gore Jr. still in the 18s here, so keep that in mind in perspective. Granted, the model did change a little bit with some additions from last season and some updates to people's fantasy best season. But getting in, why would Frank Gore Jr. show up as number one here? Well, let's kind of take this into context. We are already weeding out in this database any player since 2014, so the last 11 NFL seasons, any running back who got at least 80 opportunities, so rushing attempts and targets in a season, is in the database. So all of those guys, any of those guys, I can't remember how much are actually in this particular database, but we take all of those guys and their associated career best fantasy points per game in a season, and they get put into the model. The machine learning model does its thing and spits out predictions, shuffles, redoes it. So it uses 80% to train on, 20% to validate, gets the lowest error rates. Depending on who it's validating and who it's training on, you're going to get different values. That's why we run it 100 times. He's coming out with the best overall out of all that. But why? Well, we see, hey, he's small. He's 5'8", 201 pounds. That's already like a ding against him even reaching 80 opportunities in a season, right? He's got that going against him. He's undrafted. He's got that going against him as well. So very unlikely from the rip at, undrafted and 5'8", 201 pounds to even make a roster to get these 80 opportunities. If you kind of think about it, if somebody's 5'8", 201 pounds has gone undrafted and they're getting 80 opportunities in a season, there's probably something about that person's skill set that just makes them really good at football, which also makes them, either get more opportunities or be really efficient with the ball in their hands, which provides more fantasy points. So that's kind of the context. You can kind of think of it almost as exact opposite. And then he's coming in and running a 4.74 40-yard dash. Really, really bad, super bad speed score. But then in college, he had a 45.8% college dominator rating, which was the best in the entire class here. So it's basically saying, despite this guy's physical limitations, he's small, he's really slow, he still dominated in college. I did that at Southern Mississippi, so it's not like a complete scrub school. He had a breakout age of 18 and a half. So it's saying, hey, this guy really good in college, really bad physically. And if this guy was producing in college and producing at a young age with these terrible physical traits, he's probably really good at the fundamentals of running the ball and being good. He also had over a 10% college target share. So that also leads to a lot of fantasy points in the NFL. So taking all those things into consideration, if this dude would ever get 80 opportunities, he's already got all these cards stacked against him with his physical stature, going undrafted, he's slow. But then we see, hey, he had an early breakout age. He was super productive in college, huge college dominator rating. He caught passes in college. If this guy's getting opportunities in the NFL, there's something about him that's probably super good, and he's going to be good with the ball in his hands. He's probably going to get a lot of volume if he ever does get that volume. It's really kind of how I think this is handling it. Again, the machine learning model is just taking in numbers, and it's basically saying, here is all of the inputs and its associated fantasy points per game. So here's the inputs, and here was the answer for that particular person. It's going to take all of that knowledge and say, hey, based off of all of this, this is what, we'll get for an end result there. And I think that's how you can kind of wrap your brain around it. If this guy would get opportunities in the NFL, he's probably going to be super good at something, and he's going to end up having a pretty solid season if he gets those 80 opportunities. So that's how I can kind of think about it, and why maybe he's coming in at number one, because he's small, he's slow, but he's very productive and had a really good breakout age. There's maybe something about this guy. If he gets those 80 opportunities, he's probably going to be pretty good in the NFL. Otherwise, the likelihood of him getting 80 opportunities is probably not very high just in general. So think of it that way. But if he does get those opportunities, it's because he overcame a lot of odds due to some other extrinsic factor that probably, lends itself to him being super good with the ball in his hands. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this profile. But I think that granted some just the results of that, it warranted me explaining why it might spit out a value of number one across the board for Frank Gore Jr. versus somebody super athletic like Trey Benson, who was drafted early, who we see come in at second through fourth in the class for a lot of these things. So kind of interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to explain that and tell you that maybe it's not so crazy after all to think that this guy could be number one across the board when he's given opportunities. So let's get into the historical context after that explanation. The 13.3 to 13.6 range for the mean and median here. Let's go look at which running backs were hovering in that range. And I'm just going to go over all the running backs in between 13.2 and 13.77. We have Jeremy Hill, Brian Robinson, Jamal Williams, Ronald Jones, Ronnie Brown, Joique Bell, Amir Abdullah, Duke Johnson, Chris Ivory, Kenneth Walker, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Darrell Henderson, James Cook, and Mike Davis. I would say in terms of physical comps, we're probably looking somewhere in the range of James Cook. He's 5'11", 190. He's a lot faster though. He was able to catch some passes in college as well, but maybe Amir Abdullah, he's 5'9", 205, ran a 4.6. He also was a pretty solid college dominator rating and all that in college. So college target share, let's see what he had, 14.8%. No, that's Duke Johnson. Amir Abdullah had almost 10% college target share, 35% college dominator rating. So really probably a decent comp there is Amir Abdullah for Frank Gore. Let's go look at that maximum output. Again, number one output in the class at 18.91. Which running backs have an 18.91 or thereabouts season best or career best season in their range of outcomes? So I'm just going to go over all the guys in between 18.25 and just below 20 at 19.7. It's not a ton of people. Starts with Leonard Fournette at 18.25. We have Peyton Hillis in his one big year at 18.43. Noshawn Moreno hit 18.5. And then right at 18.9, we had Marshawn Lynch. D'Angelo Williams, 19.23. Josh Jacobs, his best season has been 19.31. And Doug Martin, 19.48. And then Aaron Jones' best season at 19.7. And out of all of the running backs in the database, we have Aaron Jones is the 30th best out of all these guys. Getting into the database, that is 256 total running backs in this database. So that's what the machine learning model is, taking those 256 inputs with the answers, answer being the fantasy points per game career best for these players, and saying based off of the inputs and the answers, this is what I expect the answer to be for this particular player across 100 simulations. Right. Well, hopefully the RStudio model and the machine learning model give you a little bit of additional confidence. I know this one definitely crazy, might not give you some confidence in these machine learning models, but did do really well in this last year. Devon Achane, number one ceiling. He was outside of most analysts' top 5 running backs going into last season, pushing towards like the 8th, 9th, 10th running back in the class. Turns out my model said, hey, he should have the number one ceiling in the class. That looks pretty good in hindsight. Jaleel McLaughlin from Denver identified him as somebody that you should be targeting at the end of your drafts or picking up off the waivers. He had the 6th best average in the class last year. Seemed absolutely insane. Who's this small running back from a small school? But he was super productive in college. Turns out, yeah, maybe the machine learning model knew what it was doing after all. Told you to fade Roschon Johnson and Kendre Miller big time because they were some of the worst prospects in there, sitting in the low to mid 20s for most of their ranks. We see Roschon Johnson did carve out a decent role, but he just didn't do anything with his opportunities. Then Kendre Miller had problems not only getting onto the field due to injury, but when he was available, they weren't playing him. And then when he had opportunities, he was not very good with his opportunities outside of a few pass receptions that he had. But yeah, it seems like this stuff's pretty good. We'll see how this year goes with the running backs and the machine learning models, especially Frank Gore here getting a crazy prediction. So that's going to do it for today's rookie prospect profile on Frank Gore Jr. I hope you appreciated it. Get a little bit of more background about what goes into this model and kind of behind the scenes what the machine learning model might be thinking as it just sees a bunch of numbers and inputs and answers essentially. So the show has been presented by Zilla Fantasy Elite. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Bye.